Marco, are you hanging out or leaving? Okay. The dogs are in my office, so.
Peter B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, October 25th, 2019. A big story broke in Washington last night. And today we're going to compare the coverage of the Washington Post, the New York Times, and MSNBC's Rachel Maddow of the emerging counter-narrative that challenges the Russiagate stories that Rachel and her colleagues in the Democratic Party and in the corporate media have been embracing for years now. And let me begin with a couple of important comments from yours truly. First of all, I want to alert you that we have been told that Monday may be a power shutdown day here in Marin County, where I'm based. So I'm iffy about a podcast Monday. Check it out. And if I'm not there, you'll know it's because the power's been shut off. So as we dive into this important story of Attorney General Bill Barr's investigation of the Mueller investigation, I think you know where my biases lie. I'm not a journalist. I'm a reporter, a commentator, an opinion guy, an interviewer, many different things, a radio host. But because my work is laced with my opinions, I never claim to be a journalist. And most people view Rachel Maddow as a journalist. And as we're going to see in a few moments, she doesn't embrace the fundamentals of journalistic practice. And I have been quite critical of the New York Times in particular for its yellow journalism on the withdrawal from Syria, on the Russiagate narrative, and many other issues related to Trump. And so, as we cover Bill Barr's announcement that his investigation of the origins of the Mueller investigation are now moving from a study to a criminal investigation with a U.S. attorney who is empowered to pursue many different claims and interview many people at the center of the Russiagate narrative. And so I want to begin with what is the most neutral coverage of this developing story. And honestly, when I opened the Washington Post webpage this morning, I was surprised to see them show some restraint here. Now, I am not inferring that it is recognition that all of their coverage of Russiagate is now questionable in the minds of the editors and reporters at the Washington Post. I don't know that. But under the byline of Matt Zapotosky, we have what I consider to be a relatively fair accounting of these events. It opens, the federal prosecutor tapped by Attorney General Barr to examine the origins of the FBI's probe of President Trump's 2016 campaign is conducting an investigation officials consider criminal in nature, according to a person familiar with the matter. Barr tapped Connecticut U.S. Attorney John Durham in May to review the FBI's investigation, looking specifically at whether the U.S. government's intelligence collection activities in the probe of possible coordination between Trump's campaign and Russia were, quote, lawful and appropriate, end quote, a person familiar with the matter said then. Durham's appointment came amid calls from Trump and his allies to investigate the FBI personnel and those in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's office involved with the probe of Trump's campaign. And at the time, the Justice Department Inspector General was conducting a similar probe. So this is a very straightforward, unembellished, no injection of obvious bias, in my opinion. The narrative continues. The significance of officials deeming Durham's probe criminal is difficult to determine by itself. Durham's appointment was noteworthy because he, unlike the Inspector General, is a federal prosecutor with the ability to convene a grand jury that could compel witnesses to testify or charge people with crimes if Durham felt that was necessary. Continuing, it was not immediately clear whether officials' consideration of his work as criminal represented a shift in the seriousness of his investigation or whether a grand jury had been convened. People familiar with the probe, now those are anonymous sources, declined to say when precisely officials gave it that designation, what specific crimes or people Durham was homing in on, and what evidence he has found. And they acknowledged their sources are anonymous here. They, like others in this story, spoke on the condition of anonymity. I'm still quoting here, federal law enforcement generally needs some indication a crime has occurred to open a criminal investigation. So it's not before paragraph 10 that they inject what you might consider to be a partisan view from the Democratic pro-Russiagate side. And it's after they quote Trump loyalist Mark Meadows, quote, those who damaged America and broke the law to spread this hoax are about to face accountability. In paragraph 10, the Post says, these reports, if true, raise profound new concerns that the Department of Justice under Barr has lost its independence and become a vehicle for President Trump's political revenge. That is a statement attributed to Jerry Nadler, chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and Adam Schiff, chair of the Intelligence Committee. If the Department of Justice may be used as a tool of political retribution or to help the president with a political narrative for the next election, the rule of law will suffer new and irreparable damage. So I consider this, I'm 4 pages into it now. And until I get to the bottom of page 5, this is a really noteworthy quote. Some conservatives have adopted an unproven theory that Professor Joseph Mifsud, who met with George Papadopoulos, was working to set up the Trump campaign when he boasted to Papadopoulos about having dirt on Clinton in the form of thousands of emails before Russia's hacking of Democrats was publicly known. Notice they use the term unproven theory. In the New York Times and in Rachel Maddow's account, as you will hear shortly, the term conspiracy theory is repeatedly used to denigrate the claims of Trump and Barr that there may have been shenanigans that led to the launch of the Russiagate investigation by the FBI in the summer of 2016. So now I shift to the voice of New York Times under the bylines of Katie Benner and Adam Goldman. Their opening line frames their bias. For more than 2 years, President Trump has repeatedly attacked the Russia investigation, portraying it as a hoax and illegal, even months after the special counsel closed it. So their opening statement is an embrace of the Mueller investigation. They pivot. Now Mr. Trump's own Justice Department has opened a criminal investigation into how it all began. Justice Department officials have shifted an administrative review of the Russia investigation, closely overseen by Attorney General Barr, to a criminal inquiry. The move gives the prosecutor, John Durham, the power to subpoena witness testimony, documents, impanel a grand jury, and file criminal charges. Next paragraph. The opening of a criminal investigation is likely to raise alarms that Trump is using the Justice Department to go after his perceived enemies. They refer to the firing of James Comey. Then in the next paragraph, Trump has made clear that he sees the typically independent Justice Department as a tool to be wielded against his political enemies. Now, that is a fair comment, but it is opinion. It's not the bare facts of what William Barr has been doing, what John Durham now is empowered to do. As we jump to page A19, the next paragraph reads, the move also creates an unusual situation in which the Justice Department is conducting a criminal investigation into itself. Now, that's not entirely true, because the CIA director at the time, John Brennan, who is a likely target of this investigation, the former director of national intelligence, proven perjurer, Jimmy Clapper, he's not a part of the FBI or the Justice Department. And so they're trying to spin this as completely bizarre and out of line, and there are bizarre aspects to it. The fact that the Attorney General himself is so deeply involved and has been traveling to Italy and England and pressuring the Australians to cooperate. It is different, and that is worth reporting. But get this, later in the article, they're talking about the FBI didn't use information from the CIA in opening the investigation, former American officials said. Now, we don't know who that is, but if they're former, it's people who served in the Obama administration, most likely. Agents' views on Russia's election interference operations crystallized by mid-August of 2016 after the CIA director shared intelligence with FBI Director Comey. And this is based on the speculation that the U.S. Attorney John Durham has asked the witnesses he's talked to whether CIA officials might have somehow tricked the FBI into opening the Russia investigation. I think that's a very fair question. And because the corporate media has sidestepped a lot of issues that I have raised repeatedly, the role of Stephen Halper, the U.S. agent. He had a cover job as a professor in England, but he has been some sort of a spook since the Reagan administration. And Stephen Halper is left in the shadows of most of the reporting in the corporate media. And here's a misleading statement. The special counsel who took over the Russia investigation, Mueller, secured convictions or guilty pleas from a handful of Trump associates and indictments of more than 24 Russians on charges related to their wide-ranging interference scheme. That is very misleading. Paul Manafort was not convicted of anything related to the wide-ranging interference scheme. Oh, there's a lot of speculation about Kilimnik and ties to Russia, when in fact Konstantin Kilimnik was an asset of the United States. So, I think it's important to note that I have had questions about the Russiagate narrative from the start. And I'm not alone. But those who challenge this dominant narrative are called conspiracy theorists, and they typically say that this only comes from supporters of Trump and right-wing media. But I'm not right-wing media. Aaron Mate writes for The Nation and produces his videos now for the Gray Zone Project. He's not a conservative. He's not a Trump loyalist. Glenn Greenwald, who initially gave great coverage to challenging Russiagate and kind of moved on, he's not a Trump supporter or a conservative. Joe Laria and my friends at Consortium News, they have challenged the official narrative, and they are not conservatives or Trump supporters, but that's the way it is characterized in the corporate media. And let me just quote again so that you can compare it to the way the Washington Post used the term unproven. Here's a direct quote from the New York Times. Barr is closely managing the Durham investigation, even traveling to Italy to seek help from officials there to run down an unfounded conspiracy that is at the heart of conservatives' attacks on the Russia investigation that the Italian government helped set up the Trump campaign advisor, who was told in 2016, that's Papadopoulos. Now, from the reporting and from commentary from a leader in Italy, it appears there's nothing there. But investigations don't always turn something up in every angle or every pocket. And yet, I believe that these are being used as ways to poison the minds of the readers of the New York Times. And I want to commend the Washington Post. I have found a lot of problems with its reporting on Russiagate over the past 3 years, but this, as I say, is a remarkable shift. And now we turn to Rachel Maddow. And one of the reasons I pointed out a few minutes ago that I don't call myself a journalist is that she does. Yesterday, or the day before, they announced that she and Andrea Mitchell and 2 other female anchors from MSNBC will be the moderators of the next Democratic debate in November. And I saw a bunch of people on Facebook praising the journalism of Rachel Maddow. She is a news anchor who presides over an opinion program that is not labeled as such. And if you're a regular listener, you know that I open my podcast every day by saying news and comment. I telegraph, even before you've heard a word of what I have to say, that this is opinion reporting. And the other reason that I don't consider Rachel Maddow to be a journalist is that she has never permitted the critics of her Russiagate telenovela, the narrative that she has been promoting relentlessly, to come on her show and say, "Hey, Rachel, what about this? Have you ever talked to Bill Binney?" The answer to that is no. She didn't talk to Bill Binney. She smeared him without any knowledge of his background and the evidence that he would have brought if she had bothered to interview him. And as you know, fundamentally, I believe that the Mueller investigation produced a limited hangout report that did not prove the central conspiracy that is at the heart of Russiagate. So now, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to play some clips from Rachel Maddow's opening segment of her show last night, when the news had just broken by the New York Times that the Barr Durham investigation is now considered a criminal investigation.
Right out of the gate tonight with some breaking news that has just come in from the New York Times. This is the news that, honestly, we've been sort of expecting for some time, or thinking that if things got really bad, it might come to this. As of tonight, according to the New York Times, it has come to this. As you can see, this is the headline just posted at the Times. Justice Department is said to open criminal inquiry into its own Russia investigation. And I'll quote to you from the article. Again, this just posted tonight. Quote, President Trump has repeatedly attacked the Russia investigation, portraying it as a hoax and illegal.
So you heard me read that. Well, she also offered an opinion there that's not out of line, that this is being released in a timely fashion to create a counter-narrative to the impeachment investigation by the House that I have acknowledged is growing in momentum and seriousness, and that the array of testimony so far is very troubling for Trump. And I've believed he's impeachable before any of this Ukraine stuff, and I believe he is still impeachable now. But Maddow didn't give you the news straight. She first injected her opinion, and then she quoted the piece that I pointed out, the opening paragraph of the New York Times report, which frames the Barr investigation as immediately inferior to Russiagate.
William Barr has been overseeing and has been very personally involved in for the last few months. He technically assigned the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, John Durham, to oversee this, but William Barr himself, the Attorney General, has apparently been an investigator in this probe and has been overseeing it and has been personally involved in it. It's involved William Barr hopping around the globe searching for evidence to bolster a right-wing conspiracy theory.
All right, that is the first time that she refers to it as a conspiracy theory. And again, she excludes honest, skeptical people who are not right-wingers. This is part of the way she has shaped this in a bubble for her loyal viewers on MSDNC.
That the real scandal of the 2016 campaign was not that Russia intervened in our election, that Russia attacked our election with the goal of helping Donald Trump win that campaign. No, according to this conspiracy theory, Russia didn't do that. Russia didn't intervene. What actually happened is that it was the Obama administration that was setting this all up as a frame job. They were colluding with foreign countries to set up Russia, to make it look like Russia was interfering, and to set up the Trump campaign to make it look like they were getting help from Russia. But it was all a frame job.
So Rachel Maddow injects here with great derision and skepticism herself, indicating that it couldn't possibly be true that Russia played the United States, that our intelligence agencies were snookered by Putin, because we are inherently superior. And I touched on this recently with the exposure of the so-called Kremlin mole, who now lives in $1 million house outside Washington, D.C. under his own name and hasn't been threatened with any punishment by Putin. There is a good scenario, a possible scenario, that Russia created the illusion of a campaign to interfere in the election, that the U.S. spooks bit down on it and rode it to the hilt. And Rachel Maddow could not contemplate that for a moment. She is so convinced of her own one-sided reporting and the power of the Russiagate narrative that allows us to blame Russia instead of Clinton and the Democrats for the loss in 2016. Let's listen to more from Ms. Maddow.
It was all a false flag operation set up by the Obama administration to somehow get Trump elected and then undermine him once he was in office. It's never been totally clear how it all worked, but that...
Well, let me explain, Rachel. The theory would be that the CIA and the FBI, either prodded by Obama and his administration or on their own, decided that Trump was dangerous and that they had to reduce his prospects of winning, or if he won, find ways to neutralize him. But see, Rachel Maddow has morphed. I first met her back in 2007 when she was on Air America, critical of Bush's war, critical of the deep state, and she is now an apologist for the deep state. She believes everything that comes from the FBI and the intelligence agencies. And that is her fundamental mistake and her failure at journalism.
It's the conspiracy theory that the Attorney General of the United States appears to have been going around the world trying to prove.
Now, that's the third time I've heard her say conspiracy theory. This time she didn't say right wing.
Just yesterday, we had this remarkable reporting about the Prime Minister of Italy, who was dragged before that country's parliament, the intelligence committees of his parliament, to answer questions about what he and the Italian government and the Italian intelligence service had been talking about with Attorney General Bill Barr, who has twice visited Italy over the past several months.
Maybe
the
he likes
Italian
pasta.
Prime Minister was summoned to Parliament to explain what those conversations were about. He later told reporters that what Barr had asked him, what Barr had asked Italian authorities to do was, quote, verify the operations of American agents. That is, Barr's question was to try to verify what the American intelligence did. In other words, America's top law enforcement official has been traveling around the world, going to other countries, asking if those other countries can provide him dirt on U.S. intelligence officials.
So, I'm going to stop here with Rachel's narrative. But what she just said affirms the point I made a moment ago. She is committed lock, stock, and barrel to the intelligence community, the organs of the government, that have screwed us, lied to us, and failed us on multitudes of occasions. But she is content to embrace them in this moment because she finds them useful to counter Donald Trump. So before I move on to other news, I do want to say that I don't believe that Bill Barr is a credible investigator, that John Durham was the guy who covered up for the destruction of the torture tapes by Jose Rodriguez at the CIA, and that while I have questions that I'd love to see answers to, I don't have any confidence that these jokers are going to deliver that. But Rachel Maddow misleads her viewers on a nightly basis, sometimes by omission. To date, she has not touched on the Hillary Clinton-Tulsi Gabbard contretemps. That's just one of many omissions. When you look at what's going on in the news on a given day and look what she chooses to cover, it's mostly anti-Trump, anti-Republican dirt. So I hope this was useful to you. I watch Rachel Maddow every night. I don't know that most of my listeners do. But I think it's important to know how the media is spinning these things and how honest skepticism of Russiagate, of the CIA, makes you by default some sort of a Trump toady. We live in dark times. Lindsey Graham claims that scurrilous resolution I described to you yesterday, criticizing the House Democrats' handling of the impeachment investigation, he now says he has 50 Republican colleagues signed on as co-sponsors. Now, this is troubling because we know that this is all ridiculous. The rules that the Democrats are using were written by Republicans, and it is not out of bounds to conduct these investigations privately. Republicans are not excluded. They've only tried to exclude those who tried to barge in who didn't have a reason to be there. And we know that a dozen of the 24 or 26 Republicans who did the little flash mob at the House investigation the other day had permission to be in the room. They were outside the room protesting that they weren't inside the room where they were permitted to be. And that just, I think frames the charade that the Republicans are using. And that doesn't mean that I'm whole hog in favor of this Ukraine-gate investigation, but I do acknowledge that substantial testimony has been developed so far and that there were dirty moves made by Trump, quid pro quo deals. But we know that that is commonplace in American foreign policy. The difference here is that the deals were intended to help Trump. And I do believe those are impeachable offenses. Now, my bullshit detector pegged when I saw this report this morning. The Trump family, after nearly 3 years of controversy, is considering selling its Washington hotel that is a few blocks from the White House. I don't believe this for a minute. It's just one of those trial balloons to, change the subject and throw people off. Yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook was quizzed by a congresswoman about whether his company has a block of rooms reserved at the Trump International there on Pennsylvania Avenue at all times. And Zuck said, "I'll get back to you, Congresswoman. I don't know who on my team would have done that, but I'll be asking my team." Today, Maria Butina was released from a federal prison in Florida and is due to be deported to Russia in short order. And I simply want to mention this because she is a casualty of Russiagate. And if you believe that Maria Butina is a Russian spy who was sent here by Putin to infiltrate the NRA and the Republican Party, I demand that you listen to my podcast from February of this year with one of the leading national security reporters in our country, James Bamford, who knew Butina personally for several years before she got into trouble. And he says almost everything you've heard about Maria Butina is not true. But the coverage once again reinforces the claim that she was this Mata Hari. She did have some sex with some people, apparently, and that's about all it takes to get tongues wagging in Washington, D.C. Now, this is a really curious one. This one's got me really confused because it was just about a week ago that the claims by Hillary Clinton in a podcast interview with David Plouffe that Jill Stein and Tulsi Gabbard are Russian assets. Well, quietly this week, major news organizations ran some corrections, like the New York Times on Wednesday, and I found this at MarketWatch, not at the New York Times. Quote, an earlier version of this article described incorrectly an element of Hillary Clinton's recent comments about Representative Tulsi Gabbard. While Clinton said that a Democratic presidential candidate was the favorite of the Russians, and an aide later confirmed the reference was to Gabbard, Clinton's remark about the grooming of a third-party candidate in the 2020 race was in response to a question about the Republican strategy, not about Russian intervention. Now, this is something that has to be inferred because MarketWatch published the full transcript of the exchanges between Plouffe and Clinton that related to her smears. And it's not really clear that she was referring to the Republicans setting up a third-party run, not the Russians. So it's only confusing. I can't clarify it for you, but I wish I could. I do want to recommend that just for objectivity, you read a piece published by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. They note that the Russia accusations against Tulsi Gabbard are untrue and a smear. But in an article headlined Russia Accusations, a Distraction from Gabbard's Actual Troubling Ties, they cite 3 different articles published over the last 9 months that show Tulsi Gabbard's alleged connections to the organization called Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. We'll just use RSS, all right? And this is described as a Hindu nationalist group that has affiliated platforms in the United States. And according to a quote from the executive director of the South Asian progressive community called Equality Labs, I don't know anything about them, these are not innocuous faith-based organizations. They are supremacist groups whose Indian counterparts have been identified as militant religious organizations by the CIA. So they're linking Tulsi Gabbard to these groups. They say that a lot of her campaign cash has come from Americans who are tied to these Indian nationalist groups. The articles also connect her to Narendra Modi, who is the Hindu nationalist leader of India today, and ask questions about Gabbard's stand on India's brutal treatment of Kashmir. I think these are important questions, and somebody needs to ask her, and she should answer them. And the other issue addressed here is they say that Gabbard is someone we should come to terms with because she may have a louder voice in the House of Representatives for years to come. And the article was published shortly before Gabbard said that she is not going to run for re-election to the House. She is going to continue her quest for the presidency. And Hillary Clinton's book with Chelsea is called Gutsy Women. Whatever you think of Tulsi Gabbard, it's a gutsy move to stay in the race when you're polling at 3% or below. I want to recommend a piece by Whitney Webb over at Mint Press News. It ties in with Bill Barr, who we were talking about earlier in the podcast. He issued a week ago a memorandum to all U.S. attorneys, law enforcement agencies, and top-ranking Justice Department officials announcing the implementation of a new national disruption and early engagement program aimed at detecting potential mass shooters before they commit any crime. Now, you remember yesterday, if you listened, I told you about a GOP Senate bill which would provide for 24/7 surveillance of America's students, including their social media, to try to find out and detect the propensity of somebody to commit a grisly crime before they do it. And yeah, I saw a Minority Report, if you did too. This is pre-crime. And I give Whitney Webb credit for bringing up important issues related to this and the idea that pervasive surveillance, instead of, say, gun legislation or other approaches, are the ways to prevent crime. And as you know, I'm deeply skeptical of that. Recommend that you read her story. Also, would like you to listen to a podcast I produced a couple of weeks ago. It was posted over at Who, What, Why, and now it's making its debut here at peterbcollins.com. We talk about surveillance in Berkeley, California, the ultra-liberal city, sometimes referred to as the People's Republic of Berkeley. And Tracy Rosenberg, who is an activist with Oakland Privacy, she explains in the podcast how Berkeley acquired some high-tech cameras that have, facial recognition and algorithmic software. And the deployment of these cameras violate the regulations of Berkeley passed by its own city council. Here's an excerpt from that conversation with Tracy Rosenberg.
In terms of Berkeley, the interesting thing was not only did they not tell anyone, but they actually had a law on the books, which we advocated for, a surveillance transparency ordinance that specifically required them to get city council consent before they took actions like this and have some kind of public hearing where they put out what they were planning to do, and the city council affirmatively said, yes, we will let this happen in Berkeley. Never happened.
That's Tracy Rosenberg talking about surveillance operations in Berkeley, and that podcast is available for my listeners today at peterbcollins.com, TuneIn, iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher. And it's all made possible by listeners like you who support my work with your subscriptions. Kyle McClary just renewed an annual. Thanks, Kyle. Peter Hoffmeister, Jason Ferguson, they kick in $5 a month. I mean, that's coffee money. And Janet Price, she doubles that to $10 a month. Tell me what you can do, and then do it. Visit peterbcollins.com. Click on the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber, you hit the sign-up page, and in seconds you can choose the level of support that you're comfortable with. And if you'd like to avoid PayPal, you can reach me through the U.S. mail at P.O. Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. And speaking of Who, What, Why, and podcasts, my colleague Jeff Schechtman caught up with my family friend Charlie Glass, who is a longtime expert on the Middle East, and there's a podcast at Who, What, Why with Charles Glass talking about Syria, Turkey, and he also offers some comments about Kashmir. That's available now at whowhatwhy.org. Well, I'm totally confused about Syria. I've stuck my neck out to back Trump's bungled effort to pull our troops out, and now they're changing the tune again. The Pentagon is announcing that the United States will maintain a reduced presence in Syria to deny ISIS access to oil revenue. But wait a minute. The Islamic State's been vanquished. We defeated them. That's why we can leave, right? Well, Trump tweeted today, "Oil is secured. Our soldiers have left and are leaving Syria for other places, then coming home." Now, how could they all have left if we're securing the oil? He continued his tweet madness. "We just did a great thing in Syria where we're getting our troops out. We took over oil." And on Wednesday, he said, "We've secured the oil, and therefore a small number of U.S. troops will remain in the area where they have the oil. And we're going to be protecting it. We'll be deciding what we're going to do with it in the future." Well, wait a goddamn minute. It's Syria's oil. How does he come to any point where there is a basis for the United States to take the oil from Syria? The wildfires continue here in California, and as I mentioned at the top, we are facing a power shutdown this weekend because of high winds, bone-dry fuel, and single-digit humidity. And the Kincaid fire, which is in Sonoma County in the wine country that was burned out 2 years ago. I prematurely ejaculated yesterday, and I apologize. I said that the early indications were that the fire wasn't caused by the bankrupt and rogue utility PG&E. Well, I was wrong. The early indications are that a PG&E tower or perhaps a generation facility at the geysers, that's a geothermal operation, was the source of the spark that led to this blaze. There will be an investigation, but I do regret what appeared to be an exoneration from me of PG&E yesterday. Joe Biden is desperate. You know, he's down to $9 million, and while some poll numbers gave him a bounce this week, he has decided that he cannot afford to uphold his commitment not to allow a super PAC to support his campaign. And my old buddy Faz Shakir, who is now the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders, said the former vice president has been unable to generate grassroots support, and now his campaign is endorsing an effort to buy the primary through a super PAC that can rake in unlimited cash from billionaires and corporations. And Lee Fung over at The Intercept identifies the likely sources of the cash for the super PAC. He says longtime Biden supporter Larry Raskey, one of the people involved in the big money effort, is the founder of lobbying firm Raskey Partners, currently lobbying for Raytheon, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and the Republic of Azerbaijan. The optics here are beautiful, aren't they? Another player is Steve Shale, a former Obama campaign strategist. His current lobbying list includes the Florida Hospital Association, JetBlue, State Farm, Walt Disney, AT&T, and the Associated Industries of Florida. Biden should have to have those little patches on his jacket, just like NASCAR drivers do next time he steps onto the debate stage. Earlier this year, David Daley joined us for a podcast, and he zeroed in on his own congressman in Massachusetts, Richard Neal. And Neal runs the House Ways and Means Committee now. He's a longtime Democratic veteran in the leadership. And as Daley pointed out, he collects a lot of campaign cash, and he delivers for the people who donate. So, right now, Nancy Pelosi's bill to negotiate drug prices, that's not permitted under Obamacare, is stalled in the Ways and Means Committee. And the other night, Tuesday at 9:30 p.m., Lloyd Doggett of Texas violated the wishes of the chairman, Mr. Neal, and he proposed a couple of amendments. One was to expand the zone of negotiation, because the bill is written now that they only have to renegotiate drug prices on 35 pharmaceuticals per year. And Lloyd Doggett wanted to increase it to 50. And the amendment lost, and Richie Neal voted with Republicans to kill it. Now, not only is that stinky, deceptive, but also at The Intercept, Aida Chavez reports that major labor unions, represented by a consortium called the Pharmaceutical Industry Labor Management Association, or PILMA, they are declaring that the bill as it stands would eliminate millions of American jobs. That is nowhere remotely true. They also say that it will, let me get the language here. It's beautifully written, that the bill would jeopardize the free market system that delivers our health care today. I can't quite find the, here we go. Recently introduced H.R. 3 would eliminate millions of American jobs, risk access to critical medicines. Implementation will have catastrophic consequences on a market-based system that has made the U.S. a leader in innovation for life-saving. Oh, come on! Oh. This is a day of a lot of bullshit. Finally, I reluctantly report on the sex lives of American officials of any political party. But Katie Hill, who got elected from a Los Angeles suburb, I believe she flipped a red district blue last year. She's 32 years old. She has disclosed previously that she's bisexual. And it appears that she is a subject of revenge porn, because a right-wing website called Red State, they got a hold of pictures of Katie Hill, and they shared them with the Daily Mail in London. Well, lawyers for Hill are now issuing a cease and desist letter to the Daily Mail to remove these photos immediately. Also claimed that she's been defamed because the article stated that she has a Nazi-inspired tattoo somewhere on her body. And I don't know what her ink is and what it says, but she has acknowledged, I know that even a consensual relationship with a subordinate is inappropriate, but I still allowed it to happen despite my better judgment. She said she had an inappropriate relationship with a female staffer. Quote, I am going through a divorce from an abusive husband who seems determined to try to humiliate me. I'm disgusted that my opponents would seek to exploit such a private matter for political gain. This coordinated effort to try to destroy me and the people close to me is despicable and will not succeed. I, like many women who have faced attacks like this before, am stronger than those who want me to be afraid. Well, we'll see where this all goes, but this is an effort to use scorched earth tactics to help Republicans win in 2020, and it's not the first, won't be the last. Thanks for listening to my lengthy news and comment podcast. These are my opinions. I'm not a journalist. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.